In front of you is Aleppo, a city in Syria, the country my parents are from. The place I would visit every summer, excited for the time of year I could enjoy my grandma's and aunt's cooking every day for a whole month. It doesn't get any better. Below are the streets of Homs, the city my dad was born and raised in. I vividly remember the days my grandma would call my brother and I over to her, handing us a couple Syrian dollars and asking us to run down these very same streets to grab milk for the household. I want everyone to think back toward their childhood homes, the neighborhoods they used to bike around as a kid, the yards they built snowmen on. And I want you to imagine it going from this to this. In the same very streets that you would often forget to look left and right before crossing to chase a ball down the driveway now look like this. And it may be hard to believe, but this picture is of the very same street you saw earlier, but a couple months later. This imagery is not from a video game or movie. It's the living reality of hundreds of thousands of Syrians currently, displaced of their loved ones, their livelihoods, and everything they hold dear. A whole city laid to ruins, the work of a dictatorial regime doing anything possible to maintain its claim to power. Miles rendered uninhabitable, including my grandmother's house. Welcome to Homs. Syria is currently in the midst of a conflict and genocide that has taken over the life of 470,000 souls and left more than 11 million people displaced of their original homes. 11 million. It has been labeled as the greatest tragedy of our century, a disgraceful humanitarian calamity that historically has had no parallel since World War II. See, the story of Syria began on April 29, 2011, in the city of Daraa, when a group of young boys wrote on their school walls, "Down with the government, the Assad regime must go." Local officials proceeded to arrest and torture a young boy named Hamza al-Khatib, killing him in the process, and then having the despicable audacity to send his body back to his family's doorstep. This became the catalyst for the Syrian people to revolt, for their freedoms, for their democracy. Peaceful protests turned to organized uprising as the government targeted civilian crowds. And as the opposition picked up arms, their government has resorted to the documented use of carpet bombing and even chemical warfare to subdue rebel forces and bring the people to their knees. I am very humbled and blessed to be in front of you here today, to be speaking about an issue that never strays far from my mind, one that's constantly on my thoughts, an issue that overwhelms my emotions at times. I am extremely proud to call myself a Syrian Muslim American. My parents lived in Syria up until they got married and came here to pursue their graduate studies. And as a child, my brother and I would visit every summer to see extended family members and explore our cultural heritage. Now things are much different. We would call my aunt in the city of Homs you saw earlier, fearing for her life because we could hear the sound of gunfire in the background. Not knowing whether the line would disconnect at any moment, whether we'd get to hear her voice again. Since 2011, I have been traveling to Turkey to work with a humanitarian organization called OSAM, volunteering in the refugee camps and field hospitals. This picture was taken in 2013, when I was 17 years old. At the time, I worked in a hospital called Bab al-Hawa, the largest one in the northern region. And due to the dire need and circumstances, I worked as a nurse, basically, picking up skills as we go, becoming part of the trauma team family. And there's nothing more horrifying than having to see a man come in, his body mutilated beyond recognition, knowing that nothing can be done for him except ease his pain. And then having to watch and endure the pain of a mother as she sits there with her child in her arms as he passes away in her lap. Specifically, I took this picture at the end of my trip. And I remember looking at the horizon, and as I stood there, a government helicopter flew to the right. As I was watching, a bomb dropped from the side of the helicopter. As I stood there, it felt like time had stopped momentarily, because no matter how fast I ran or how loud I screamed, I could not save the young mother and her child who were taking a nap, unable to hear the screams of their neighbors. I could only imagine the face of a husband coming home after long days of work, only to find his home destroyed and being told his family lies underneath. And I just stood there, watching helplessly as the smoke rose to the heavens. And it was at that moment that I decided to dedicate my life to this cause, to be a voice for the Syrian community who has been marginalized by the media, whose narrative has been completely dehumanized. As the international community turns their backs in silent complicity, as our governments play their political games at the cost of hundreds of thousands of lives. Just because it's not happening here, to us, in our homes, does not make it any less of a human condition. These are men, women, and children who have the same capacity to feel joy, to reciprocate love, but they have been stripped of their dignity and self-worth. Just as the civilian opposition has been drowned out by the tyranny of the Assad regime and the radical ideology of terror groups like ISIS. I met a man named Omar, a 27-year-old who was paralyzed from the waist down by an airstrike on the marketplace that took his wife and 1-year-old newborn child. And as he sat there, as I tended to his injuries at the post-operational clinic in Turkey, he showed me this picture, his last remaining connection to his departed family. And he grabbed my shoulders, shaking me, pleading with me, asking me a single question. Why does no one help us? Why does no one care? And I stare at him blankly, wishing I had an answer to comfort him from the cruelty of the world we live in. This is Yarmouk, once a refugee establishment inside Syria. But after 2 long years of government siege, an attempt to starve out the civilian opposition, cutting off water and government and food supplies, electricity, basic things that people need to survive, it has deteriorated to this. An official from a UN convoy commented on the systemic starvation, saying that people had been reduced to eating anything, from bugs to insects to vegetation around them, to the point where you stand there and you look around you and there's no grass to be seen. This is the state of depravity, a vacuum that has led to the rise of terrorist organizations like ISIS, who feed on people's fears and their bitterness and their lost sense of hope and purpose, attempting to convince them of a convoluted higher purpose in life. And unfortunately, the fear-mongering of the media only perpetuates this vicious cycle, labeling refugees as poison to our societies, bound to only bring our lives harm, sending them back to what's left of their country. Systemic targeted bombings of hospitals and schools and mosques and churches has left Syrian people with 2 options: either flee or be killed. And 4.7 million people have chosen the former, escaping with only the clothes on their back. 1/4 of Syria's original population of 23 million. More importantly, the UN estimates that over half of the Syrian refugee population is under the age of 18. That is over 2 million children and teenagers who have been without homes for 5 years, who have undergone extreme physical and psychological torment that scars them indefinitely. In the psychosocial support clinics, I worked with kids like Maryam and Noura, who would act completely normal under most circumstances. But when they heard the sound of a door slamming shut or any sudden noise, they'd whimper in fear. Because it'd bring back memories of the days they cowered under their kitchen table as mortars rained around their home, praying that one would not find their roof. Furthermore, this means there are over 2 million children who have been without education for 4 years. The same education that you and I have been blessed with. This university that I've had the privilege to attend. I want you to think back to where you were 5 years ago. And imagine if your life had taken a left turn. I was a sophomore in high school, 15 years old at the time. I would certainly not be here in front of you today, let alone have my high school diploma. I would be with my younger siblings, living the monotony of a refugee camp, or wandering the streets of some foreign country, prone and susceptible to crime and forced labor and the call to terrorism. Furthermore, I ask you a question. How are these kids going to develop the capacity and the skill set to become contributing members of their society? Hopefully, when the Syrian conflict is over one day, how are they going to go back and rebuild this country? And although a permanent solution is not possible until Syria is made safe for its civilians, until our governments put aside their interest and uphold their humanitarian obligations. In the meanwhile, it calls for a concerted effort to educate and provide for the millions of youth who have been deprived of their basic rights. Otherwise, this lost generation of Syrians will continue to grow exponentially, living their lives parallel to ours invisibly. And one day, our grandchildren will read the history books and wonder, how did the world ever let this happen? Fortunately, those books have yet to be read. And it is our generation that must rewrite this narrative, taking a moment to show gratitude, to be more aware, to reflect on the problems that cripple our collective existence. And as a Syrian American, I have a responsibility to be a voice for the Syrian community, to utilize the resources I have been afforded. And although some days we feel utterly hopeless, that the work that you and I do for the respective communities we care for pales in magnitude to the problem at hand. Or even worse, I'll feel guilty. Guilty that I've become so self-absorbed with my own life that I haven't put time aside to think about the people I claim to care about so much. And in those moments, I think toward my mother. A person I hold very dear to my life, someone who has been my biggest source of inspiration. When the revolution began in 2011, she dropped all her obligations and booked a flight to Turkey, in hopes of finding an organization that could benefit from her skills as a pharmacist. And she worked tirelessly from refugee camp to field hospital to management, and has now opened a branch of the organization here in the United States to engage with our government. And I never understood how she maintained her inner drive, that burning passion that can be seen by simply looking into her eyes as she speaks to you. But now it has become very clear. She understands that the work she's doing today is not for her. It's not for her reputation or the organization she works for. It's for these young children whose innocence has been robbed and memory scarred by the images of blood literally flowing down their streets. Yet, in their presence in Turkey, I felt an innate sense of hope. Their laughter and endearing smile would always lighten the room, pushing me to persevere. So yes, we are working for Maryam. We are working for Noura and the countless others who are reaching their hands out to us right now, giving us the opportunity to shape a world of justice, a world where every individual's humanity is recognized and celebrated, a world that everyone can call home. Thank you.